Good morning, you're watching Morning at NTV, and today on Take Note we're addressing torture, but more so treatment and rehabilitation, and also the support that torture victims can get. And for this discussion I'm hosting Samuel Herbert Nsubuga, the CEO of ACTV, which is the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Good morning, Samuel.
Good morning, Flavia.
Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
It was quite an interesting discussion. Do you intend to line up behind your chairman?
I will do.
You will do.
I'll do that.
Of course.
Yes.
So torture has become a big conversation over the last probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, to be honest, pushing back.
True.
And it's a lot political than it is anything, because I think it was highlighted so much once we got into electing leaders, once we got into campaigns, once we got to discuss and talk about politics. But I don't want people to think that torture is only limited to what comes out of politics.
True.
Or what comes out of me visiting the police station.
True.
So according to our anti-torture law, what would you define or expand torture as?
Okay, thank you very much, Flavia. I'll actually define torture. I would like us to define torture with the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, where the definition of torture was widened to mean torture means any act or omission by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted. Please mark the note, intentionally inflicted on a person by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of any person, whether a public official or other person acting in an official or private capacity. Now the issue of private capacity was included. Before that, torture did not include torture
in the home
with torture by private individuals. But in this case, in the Ugandan context, we felt that it was important that even torture by private individuals is included.
Because, I mean, those cases were also coming up, you know, someone in the home is torturing a child or torturing an adult. And probably one of the biggest issues when it comes to torture victims, nobody reports. People are reporting, just not enough. But before we get into that, based on your research and what you hear about torture, I'd like to know maybe the areas of torture that people are reporting is, because I know that Human Rights said that in Uganda the police are the #1 perpetrators of this.
Yes.
But maybe we're neglecting to see the other areas where there's also torture, and you've also included private in this. So in your experience, who or what are the areas or places of torture?
Okay, now the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims registers survivors of torture, and we usually access these survivors of torture in the prisons. We have an outreach program. We go to communities, but we also have walk-ins, people who are referred to our centers, and still the police on our list is the highest perpetrator. Broken down to even crime preventers, flying squad, but we do not only treat Ugandans, but we also treat refugees. We also have a number of torture from the DRC government, because most of the refugees are from the Congo, DRC, but the UPDF also is on the list. The prison also still, and then private individuals. So those are the top 5.
Okay, so when you say refugees from DR Congo, so you're getting people who are reporting torture or rehabilitating that the torture has not happened in this country.
It hasn't happened in this country, but has happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Interesting.
Yes. Okay,
so reporting, why is this the biggest challenge? Are we afraid of who we are reporting to? Are we afraid that when we report nothing happens?
Reporting is actually one thing we really want people to report torture occurrences, because at the end of the day we want justice served, we want the perpetrators punished. But unfortunately we have instances where after we treat and rehabilitate survivors of torture, they would like to go back to their productive life and not pursue a case
any further. Cost?
Because they believe that there is no protection against witness. There is no witness protection law, which is something which the government has to pursue. I believe it's now in cabinet or parliament.
So in this case, before you describe that to us, the witness would be someone who's witnessed torture, not the actual victim or survivor of torture.
The one who has witnessed, and also even
the victim or the survivor.
The victim himself, because actually when that person is trying to tell his or her story, then that person, says, we always ask the question, who did this to you?
Yes.
And then, of course, when you tell us this person did this to you, then we try to pursue that person so that that person is punished. So at that point in time, there are some who try to
push
retreat
back, depending on who it is.
Yeah,
saying.
depending. Okay. So, but would like this law to be passed so that at least people can come out and so that we can pursue these cases further.
Okay, before it's passed, what would be included in the witness protection law?
Basically, when one comes to the stand, because we have now, like, let me give you an example of the process. After treatment and rehabilitation, we develop a medical report for the survivor of torture. Now, this medical report is utilized by the Uganda Human Rights Commission in their tribunals. And then there are witnesses who come. Our doctor comes and speaks, but then also the witness or the survivor of torture also comes and also gives evidence, and even the other courts of law. So at that point where you point out that this is the perpetrator, that is where it's extremely important that these witnesses are protected so that they can speak their mind.
I'm worried about the trail based on some of the cases you've worked with, because if someone says, I've been tortured, and perhaps it's physical and there's evidence, we've seen it on TV, where someone's arm has been hit, they've been burned, to whatever torture. Where's the trail? Because it could stand to be my word against Sam and saying that he did this to me, because sometimes there's no trail or evidence. Do we have the capacity and training to whether retrieve this evidence or to investigate fully and have that trail that can actually support this victim?
SCTV has a diverse human resource. We have doctors, clinical psychologists, counselors, social workers, and what happens is that there is what they call the Istanbul Protocol guidelines, which assist this human resource to effectively document cases of torture. So when one comes to our center to be examined, they look out to all those pointers, and then those pointers are the ones which are effectively documented to push the process further for accessing justice after the treatment and rehabilitation. Okay,
so we talked about reporting. So who can report? Everyone and anyone can report.
Everyone and
but I'm also told someone can report on your behalf.
True. Because at times some of the people are not in the capacity to report. Most of the survivors of torture, unfortunately, are the vulnerable and economically disadvantaged. So even the challenge of even getting to our centers can be difficult. So we have what we call home visits. We even visit their homes. And as I said, we have an extensive outreach program where we go to the communities, we go to the prisons to access these survivors of torture. But then again, we get referrals from the Uganda Human Rights Commission, from civil society organizations, the Coalition Against Torture, who send the clients to us for treatment. And of course, there are those who know about us, who walk into our centers. Okay,
we've talked about prisons, we've talked about police, and someone might think, okay, if someone is in prison, for example, and they wouldn't call it torture, they call it punishment.
Yes.
Where do we draw the lines? When do we know that now it has turned into torture? Must it be what they were saying, breaking kneecaps, for me to know that's torture? Is a slap also torture? When do we know that this is punishment, this is now torture? I know you were talking about there was a law that stipulates the difference.
Yes. Punishment and any lawful sanction against an individual is not torture, and as long as it's well stipulated that this is a punishment, that is not torture. And of course, it's the discretion of the judicial officers at that point to draw the line that this is torture or not torture. So I would like to put it across to those who are supposed to mete out this punishment, that they are covered, as long as it doesn't cross that line.
because
be
you talked
torture
about torture being pain.
Or inhumane,
the minute I'm in
cruel,
pain.
excruciating pain.
Okay.
Excruciating pain. Because somebody may say slap is torture. No,
Yes,
that's not.
because
That's
it's
not
pain.
torture. That's not torture.
Yeah.
Excruciating pain. We also have an ingredient of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, which is also taken care of in the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. And all these ingredients, it's of course at the discretion of the judicial officers to draw a line that this has happened. But otherwise, a slap or
because
whatever.
Whoever is in charge of administering or levying this punishment
Yes.
in the right confinement,
Yeah.
whether it's a prison
Yes.
or in the police detention, they should know.
Yes, they should. They should know. So awareness has to be created that all these.
But do you believe
all
that's
these
already
bodies,
there now, or some of them are acting without enough information and capacity to do this?
We have done a lot of awareness of this law. This law has been simplified into easy to understand English. We have actually translated the simplified version into Luganda, Swahili, Luo, and Runyankore Ruchiga. But we should do more. We would like to simplify it in more languages, and of course spread it to all parts of the country, which is an ongoing process. We have also developed what they call the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture regulations to help the chain of justice, the justice law and order sector, to utilize this law better, so that we can have some convictions which are not currently happening.
Yeah, when we're still on lawful punishment, I'd like to ask, we asked who can report, and it was anyone can report torture.
Yes.
So those, I know you do community outreaches and you also go in prisons.
Yeah.
Is it easy? Because I mean, the community is probably easy to realize, okay, this is a tortured victim, because I mean, there are no laws of punishment there. But then in a prison, would you know the fine line between someone trying to get sympathy versus the one who's actually tortured? Because I feel like that would be a sensitive area, for example, or a place to actually get torture victims, because the system might not really be open for them to also be honest about what's happening.
Okay, what happens is that in the prisons we actually we get most of them go into prison when they have been tortured from other agencies. Yeah, so what happens is that we find them in prison and we treat them from prisons.
All right.
But I can say that the prison service has greatly improved in the area of even before the law was passed. They already had administrative measures against torture for their officers. So there's even awareness about torture. So there's
help me and an average person understand, because we are under the impression some forms of torture can happen. We will call it torture, you can correct me here, when one wants to maybe obtain information and investigating.
Yes.
And under that investigating, they have certain lines they can cross. Okay,
now there is a in the investigative agencies in doing their work, they have investigative techniques which they use, for example, to extract a confession. And of course, some of those techniques may cross the line. And that is where we take a plea for resources to be increased towards investigative agencies, the CIID, the forensic lab, to have an up-to-date laboratory, an up-to-date data bank and whatever, so that the officers in these investigative agencies use more of forensic science.
So they don't have to resort to the torture.
So that they don't have to resort to
I hear what you're saying.
Yes.
So the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Let's just highlight those two words, treatment and rehabilitation. Yes. Are you saying that treatment, you take on the burden of actually treating these people in hospitals and the illness? What happens there? Explain to me.
Okay, now torture has both physical and psychological effects. What it means is both your body and your mental faculties are affected by torture. So in the sense of treating and rehabilitating a survivor of torture, we look at trying to make sure that the physical effects go, and the psychological effects, which take a long time, also are dealt with. But in addition to that, we add the issue, we try to add the issue of livelihoods. Now livelihoods, most of the survivors of torture now become, they are breadwinners of their families. So we try to connect these survivors of torture to agencies which can give them a livelihood, a beginning, an income generating activity, so that they can go back and fend for their families. So at the end of the day, when that process is completed, that is where we could talk of treatment and then rehabilitation.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So and anyone can come to the center for treatment or rehabilitation?
Yes.
Okay, so help me understand. If I come for rehabilitation or treatment and not necessarily want to pursue the perpetrators, can that still happen? Because when we're talking about people not reporting, they're also fearing to go after whoever tortured them. So can you still carry out this treatment and rehabilitation?
Yes,
and ignore the other part?
We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, but we try our level best to persuade the people who we treat and rehabilitate that these perpetrators, in order for them not to continue what they are doing, they should be punished.
Yes.
They should pay for their sins. Of course, when we can generally just rely on the medical reports, because our doctors also are expert witnesses. If the witness is uncomfortable but of course we would always like the witness to provide evidence which can make a case stronger. But we pursue it without them. But it would have been better if we were with them.
Of course, because they are very,
they are very
critical
key ingredient of that case.
All right, so before we go into justice, compensation, we had talked about, especially in reporting, what are the alternatives? Where else can someone report torture? If we're saying that police is being ranked, what if the police is who you're reporting? Who do you then report to? And of course, we know that police is not one section. Yeah, true. They're different ones.
The police has the widest coverage in this country. At least there's a police post near your home. So we still believe if you are tortured, report to the police. If you cannot report to the police, report to the
So if you're tortured by this police station, we're saying don't report at this police station. Report to the next one.
You report to the next one. Yeah, okay. Because the police are aware about the anti-torture law. They actually developed anti-torture guidelines, so they are aware about torture. So we still believe that the police being the nearest, you should be report, your first. But otherwise, there's the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Coalition Against Torture Organizations. There are 19, which ACTV chairs currently, and any human rights organization or civil society organization can do for reporting a torture occurrence. Okay, great.
Yes. So there are alternatives there. So justice and compensation. Well, I mean, justice is I've reported.
Yes.
They've actually taken on my case. They've investigated, and someone is the perpetrator is actually brought to book, and I can see it.
Yes.
You can explain to us if there are any successes, because perhaps the lack of well-known successes is why people might be fearing to report, because maybe they're sure that justice will not be served.
Okay, I can talk about successes in terms of just last year, mid-last year, we were given a court order to examine the 20 suspects who were allegedly killed Andrew Felix Kaweesi. And from that, the compensation was awarded of 80 million shillings per suspect. So in that case, the issue of taking through justice up to awarding of compensation, we can term that a success.
Yes.
But then, of course, at the end of the day, you would want this money paid, because as we speak now, the arrears come to about 7 billion Uganda shillings for human rights violations over
and that's
the
for the
years.
Uganda police.
not necessarily Uganda police, but the whole human rights violations. So so that is now a challenge. Compensation is awarded, but the challenge
someone has to pay and someone doesn't pay.
Now the government is the one which has been paying. But there is a new policy which is starting next financial year, where the individual will be liable now to pay, and if not,
the individual who actually carried out the torture. Okay.
And if not, then the individual's employer will have to prevail, or if not, the employer itself pays. So hopefully this will help. Will help everyone to be conscious of their actions.
Yes.
Because if they
and not stay under a blanket.
if they touch your ministry or department or agency budget, I think that's where they'll feel the pinch. So that is where we want to go. We hope it's implemented, because we have a challenge of implementation in this country. But it will really help, we hope.
Okay, so because as we wind up, I was saying that compensation is good, but if you're saying you're going to give someone 80 million, I mean, maybe those are the good cases, but someone out there might be told eventually we'll compensate you. As we know, this process also includes legal. There are costs there. You must pay lawyers. You must push this case as far as you can. And sometimes, as you said, the victims of torture are those at the bottom, those who cannot even afford this. And I think there's still also a gap for resources in terms of supporting torture victims legally. Do you offer the legal side of it?
We not yet. We are still providing legal advice, but we are on our way to provide legal aid. Great. But our partners in the Coalition Against Torture provide legal aid.
So if they ended up with you, you'd still find them an alternative.
Yeah, we can find them an alternative.
Okay, so I guess the takeouts would be that if you are tortured, know someone who is tortured, come up, report, and get the ball rolling at least. True. And if you can, find the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation for Torture Victims. And I like this because even those who, as you said, it's also psychological. Yes. The physical might have, worn out and you've forgotten about the pains, but not in your mind, psychologically.
Which takes a long time.
It takes longer, and sometimes doesn't even get rid. So do seek for rehabilitation at this center, and they can also advise you there on how to take your case further. True. Thank you so much, Samuel Nsubuga, the CEO of African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. That's it for Morning at NTV.
Thank you.